Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Fort Benning with nothing but a worn duffel bag and the scuffed leather boots on her feet. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly as dozens of new recruits gathered on the asphalt, all clutching their paperwork and trying to look tougher than they felt. Sarah kept her head down, focusing on the cracked pavement beneath her feet rather than the curious stares from the other young men and women around her. The boots had seen better days. That much was obvious to anyone with eyes. The leather was faded from black to a dull brown in places, with deep creases across the toes and worn spots along the heels. The laces were mismatched, one black, one dark brown, and had been knotted back together in several places where they had snapped over the years. While every other recruit sported shiny new combat boots fresh from the store, Sarah's footwear told a different story entirely. "Holy cow, look at those things," whispered Jake Morrison, a stocky kid from Ohio who had arrived wearing pristine everything from head to toe. He nudged his neighbor, a tall blonde girl named Ashley Chen, and pointed discreetly toward Sarah's feet. "Did she dig those out of a dumpster?" Ashley snickered quietly. "Maybe she couldn't afford new ones. My dad always said the military attracts people with nowhere else to go." She examined her own spotless boots with satisfaction. Having spent nearly $200 on the best pair the surplus store had to offer, the whispers spread through the group like wildfire. Marcus Williams, who had been bragging about his college ROTC experience, shook his head in disbelief. "How does someone show up to basic training looking like they're homeless? The drill sergeants are going to eat her alive." Sarah heard every word. But she had learned long ago to let cruel comments roll off her back. She had endured worse things than a few privileged kids. Making jokes about her appearance, what they couldn't see was the weight of responsibility she carried, the promises she had made, and the legacy represented by every scuff and scratch on those seemingly worthless boots. When Drill Sergeant Rodriguez finally emerged from the building and began his intimidating welcome speech, Sarah stood at attention with the rest of them. His steely gaze swept across the formation, pausing momentarily on various recruits as he sized them up. When his eyes landed on Sarah's boots, his expression remained neutral, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Listen up, recruits," Rodriguez bellowed, his voice carrying easily across the group. "For the next 16 weeks, this place is going to test everything you think you know about yourselves. Some of you will discover strength you never knew you had. Others will realize they don't belong here. The military doesn't care where you came from, what your daddy does for a living, or how much money your family has in the bank." Jake and Ashley exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing. That last comment seemed aimed directly at the girl with the pathetic boots. During the first equipment issue, Sarah received her standard military boots, along with everyone else. The supply sergeant, a weathered woman in her 40s, noticed Sarah carefully placing her old boots into her duffel bag instead of throwing them away like most recruits did with their civilian footwear. "Those have sentimental value, Martinez?" the supply sergeant asked, not unkindly. "Yes, Sergeant. They belong to someone very important to me," Sarah replied quietly. The supply sergeant nodded and moved on, but several recruits nearby heard the exchange and filed it away for future mockery. The running jokes about Sarah's poor person boots became a constant source of entertainment during the first week of basic training. During evening downtime, when recruits were allowed to clean and maintain their equipment, Ashley would make exaggerated shows of polishing her pristine civilian boots that she kept for sentimental reasons, an expensive pair of hiking boots from a European vacation. "I just love taking care of my boots," she would announce loudly. "Some people don't appreciate quality footwear, but I was raised to value nice things." Jake would chime in with comments about how his family could have bought Sarah 10 pairs of decent boots with their pocket change. Marcus, despite his ROTC background, proved to be just as petty, suggesting that Sarah's boots were probably stolen from a thrift store. The torment wasn't limited to just the boots, of course. Sarah's entire background became fair game for mockery. When she mentioned working 3 jobs before enlisting, Jake laughed and said his summer job at his uncle's law firm probably paid more than all 3 of hers combined. When she quietly ate the less desirable portions of their meals without complaint, Ashley would loudly announce that she couldn't even imagine being so hungry that Spam looked appetizing. Through it all, Sarah remained focused on her training. She excelled in physical fitness, consistently scoring in the top percentile during runs and strength tests. Her marksmanship was exceptional, and she seemed to have an intuitive understanding of military tactics and strategy that impressed even the most jaded drill sergeants. But her quiet competence only seemed to fuel her tormentors' resentment. "She's probably trying extra hard because she has something to prove," Marcus declared, after Sarah outperformed him on the obstacle course for the third consecutive day. "Poor people always think they have to work twice as hard to be accepted." What none of them knew was that Sarah had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The discipline, the dedication, the unwavering commitment to excellence. These weren't desperate attempts to fit in. They were the natural result of being raised by someone who had embodied these values every single day until his final breath. The worn boots in her duffel bag weren't just sentimental keepsakes. They were a daily reminder of the man who had worn them through jungles and deserts, who had carried wounded comrades to safety, and who had faced down impossible odds with courage that most people couldn't even imagine. They carried within them a story that would silence every cruel word and change how every person in that barracks thought about courage, sacrifice, and what it truly meant to serve. By week 6 of basic training, the harassment had escalated beyond simple comments about Sarah's footwear. Jake Morrison had convinced several other recruits to join his campaign of cruelty, turning what had started as casual mockery into systematic bullying. They would hide her equipment, mess up her perfectly made bunk when she was at chow, and create elaborate theories about her background that grew more ridiculous with each telling. "I heard her family lives in a trailer park," Jake announced during one evening's entertainment session. "Probably doesn't even have running water. That would explain why she's so grateful for military showers." Ashley Chen had become the unofficial queen of backhanded compliments. "It's really inspiring how hard Sarah works," she would say with false sincerity. "I mean, when you come from nothing, you really appreciate opportunities like this." The military is probably the best thing that ever happened to her family. What made the situation worse was that Sarah never defended herself. She never snapped back, never lost her temper, never even seemed particularly bothered by their constant attacks. This restraint infuriated her tormentors even more, as if her quiet dignity was somehow an insult to their efforts. Marcus Williams, whose ROTC experience had made him something of a leader among the recruits, decided to escalate things during weapon maintenance period. As Sarah carefully cleaned her M16 with the methodical precision that had become her trademark, Marcus made a show of struggling with his own rifle. "Martinez," he called out loudly enough for the entire bay to hear, "you seem to know your way around weapons pretty well. Did you learn that growing up in the ghetto? Lots of drive-by shootings in your neighborhood?" Several recruits laughed, but Sarah simply continued her work without looking up. Her hands moved with steady confidence, disassembling and reassembling her weapon with the kind of practiced ease that came from years of experience. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been observing from across the room, walked over to inspect Sarah's work. He examined her rifle carefully, checking every component with the thoroughness that had made him legendary among trainee platoons. "Outstanding work, Martinez," he announced. "This weapon is cleaner than most of these other recruits manage after twice the time." He raised his voice slightly. The rest of you might want to ask Martinez for pointers instead of running your mouths." The public praise only made things worse for Sarah during off-duty hours. That evening, Jake cornered her near the laundry room when she was alone. "Think you're pretty special, don't you?" he said, his voice dripping with resentment. "Teacher's pet, with your sad story and your pathetic boots. Well, newsflash. Charity case. We can all see right through you." Sarah finally looked directly at him, her dark eyes steady and calm. "I'm not looking for trouble, Jake. I just want to finish training and serve my country." "Your country?" Jake laughed harshly. "This country doesn't owe you anything. People like you join the military because you can't make it anywhere else. At least be honest about it." For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, something flickered in Sarah's expression. It wasn't anger, exactly, but something deeper and more dangerous. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried an edge that made Jake take an involuntary step backward. "You don't know anything about me or my family, and you definitely don't know why I'm here." Jake recovered quickly, puffing out his chest. "Oh, really? Then why don't you enlighten us? What's your big secret, Martinez? What's so special about your sob story that makes you think you deserve respect?" Sarah stared at him for a long moment, then simply walked away. But Jake's question had planted a seed among the other recruits. What was Sarah's story? Why was she so secretive about her background? And most importantly, what was the deal with those ratty old boots she guarded so carefully? The opportunity for answers came during mail call the following week. Most recruits received regular letters and care packages from home, filled with snacks, toiletries, and reminders of the civilian world they had left behind. Sarah rarely received mail, which only reinforced the narrative her tormentors had constructed about her impoverished background. But on this particular Tuesday, she received a small, carefully wrapped package. The return address showed it was from someone named Elena Martinez in San Antonio, Texas. Sarah accepted the package with trembling hands, her usual composure cracking slightly as she recognized the handwriting on the label. "Ooh, care package from Mama," Ashley sing-songed. "Let me guess. Homemade tortillas and hand-me-down clothes?" Sarah ignored the taunting and carefully opened the package in full view of the other recruits, who had gathered around like vultures sensing weakness. Inside was a simple wooden frame containing an old black and white photograph. The image showed a young man in military dress uniform, his chest decorated with numerous ribbons and medals. His face was serious but kind, with dark eyes that looked remarkably similar to Sarah's own. "Who's the old soldier, Martinez?" Marcus asked, craning his neck to get a better look. "Your grandfather? Let me guess, he was a cook or something." Sarah held the photograph carefully, her fingers tracing the frame's edges. "My father," she said quietly. "Staff Sergeant Roberto Martinez." Jake snatched the frame from her hands before she could protest, holding it up for everyone to see. "Staff Sergeant Robert Martinez," he read mockingly. "Wow, Sarah, your dad made it all the way to Staff Sergeant. That's almost impressive." In a small-time military family sort of way, what Jake couldn't see, and what none of the other recruits noticed in their eagerness to find new material for mockery, was the small detail that would have changed everything. Among the rows of ribbons on Staff Sergeant Martinez's chest, partially obscured by the faded quality of the old photograph, was a distinctive blue ribbon with white stars. Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides as Jake passed the photograph around like a trophy. Ashley made exaggerated cooing sounds about how cute Sarah's father looked in his uniform. Marcus began speculating about what kind of boring desk job the man had probably held during his service. What none of them knew was that Staff Sergeant Roberto Martinez had been posthumously promoted after single-handedly holding off an entire enemy platoon for 3 hours, while his wounded comrades were evacuated from a compound in Afghanistan. He had been shot 4 times and hit by shrapnel from 2 grenades, but had continued fighting until the last wounded soldier was safely airlifted out. He had died with his rifle in his hands, and his boots still laced tight, 24 hours before his daughter Sarah's 16th birthday. And those boots, the worn, scuffed, seemingly worthless boots that had become the symbol of everything these recruits thought was wrong with Sarah Martinez, had walked through the same Afghan soil where her father had made his final stand. They had carried him through 12 years of faithful service to his country. They were all she had left of the man who had taught her that true strength came not from wealth or privilege, but from an unshakable commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The revelation was coming. And when it did, it would shatter every assumption these recruits had made about courage, honor, and what it truly meant to wear the uniform. The truth came out during week 10, in a way that nobody expected and nobody could have prepared for. It was Family Day, when relatives were invited to visit Fort Benning and watch their recruits demonstrate the skills they had learned during basic training. The parade ground was filled with proud parents, siblings, and grandparents, all eager to see their loved ones in uniform. Sarah stood at attention with the rest of her platoon, but her eyes constantly scanned the crowd, searching for a face she knew wouldn't be there. Her father had been dead for 2 years now, and her mother worked double shifts at a nursing home just to keep their small apartment. There would be no family coming to watch Sarah march or to pin on her graduation insignia. Jake Morrison's parents had driven down from Ohio in their BMW, bringing enough snacks and supplies to feed half the platoon. Ashley Chen's entire extended family had made the trip from California, complete with professional cameras to document every moment. Marcus Williams's father, a retired Army colonel, wore his dress uniform and seemed to know half the base personnel by name. The demonstration went perfectly. Sarah's platoon executed every drill with precision, their synchronized movements drawing appreciative applause from the crowd. During the individual skills demonstration, Sarah's marksmanship scores were announced to the gathered families, a perfect score that earned a round of genuine applause even from the parents of her tormentors. It was during the informal meet and greet period afterward that everything changed. Colonel Williams was making rounds, introducing himself to various recruits and asking about their backgrounds. When he reached Sarah, who stood alone while other families clustered around their soldiers, his demeanor was cordial but slightly condescending. "Martinez, isn't it?" he said, extending his hand. "Fine shooting out there, soldier. Your family must be very proud." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. "They would be, if they were here." Colonel Williams's expression softened slightly. "Military family?" he asked. "Yes, sir. My father served for 12 years before he was killed in Afghanistan." The conversation might have ended there, with polite condolences and a change of subject. But Jake, who had been listening nearby with his parents, decided to insert himself into the discussion with his characteristic lack of sensitivity. "Oh, that's Sarah's dad," Jake announced, pulling out his phone to show the photograph he had taken of the framed picture during mail call. "Staff Sergeant Robert Martinez. Sarah's pretty proud of him making it all the way to Staff Sergeant." Colonel Williams took Jake's phone and studied the photograph carefully. As his eyes moved across the image, taking in details that the younger people had missed, his expression began to change dramatically. The casual politeness disappeared, replaced by something approaching shock. "Staff Sergeant Roberto Martinez," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Afghanistan? 2022? Sarah's eyes widened. "Yes, sir." Did you know him?" Colonel Williams handed the phone back to Jake with shaking hands, then came to attention and rendered a sharp salute to Sarah. The informal chattering around them gradually died away, as people noticed the senior officer's unexpected behavior. "Private Martinez," Colonel Williams said, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet. "Your father was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously for his actions at Forward Operating Base Chapman. He saved the lives of 14 wounded soldiers during a 6-hour firefight, continuing to fight even after being wounded multiple times. He is considered one of the bravest soldiers of this generation." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's face went white as the implications of what he had just heard sank in. Ashley looked like she might be sick. Marcus stared at his father in confusion, unable to process what was happening. Sarah's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face. She reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out a small blue case. With trembling fingers, she opened it to reveal the Medal of Honor, its star-shaped design catching the afternoon sunlight. The highest military decoration for valor, awarded to fewer than 3,500 people in American history. "He earned this protecting his brothers," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "And these boots." She gestured down at her feet, where she was wearing the standard military-issued combat boots. "The ones you all made fun of are back in my footlocker. They're all I have left of him. He wore them for 12 years of faithful service. They walked through 3 combat deployments. They were on his feet when he made his final stand." Colonel Williams turned to address the gathering crowd of families and recruits, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military service. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are in the presence of a Gold Star family member. Private Martinez is the daughter of Medal of Honor recipient Staff Sergeant Roberto Martinez, who gave his life so that others might return home to their families. The boots that some of you found amusing are a sacred relic of American heroism." Jake Morrison felt like the ground might open up and swallow him whole. Every cruel comment, every mocking laugh, every moment of perceived superiority crashed down on him like a physical weight. The girl he had tormented for wearing worn boots was the daughter of a man who had literally died for his country, whose courage had been recognized at the highest level possible. Ashley Chen began crying, overwhelmed by the realization of how badly she had misjudged someone she had claimed to find inspirational. All of her comments about appreciating opportunities and coming from nothing took on a horrible new meaning when applied to someone who had lost her father in service to the nation. Marcus Williams looked at his own father, seeing the respect and admiration in the older man's eyes as he continued to maintain his salute. Marcus had spent months bragging about his ROTC experience and his family's military connections, never realizing that the quiet girl with the worn boots carried a legacy that dwarfed anything in his background. As word spread through the crowd about Sarah's identity and her father's sacrifice, the entire atmosphere of the gathering changed. Other military families approached to pay their respects, many with tears in their eyes. Parents who had never heard of Staff Sergeant Martinez asked to hear his story. Children who had been playing nearby suddenly stood quietly, sensing the gravity of the moment even if they didn't fully understand it. Sarah spent the rest of Family Day surrounded by people who wanted to honor her father's memory and express their gratitude for his sacrifice. The isolation and mockery that had defined her basic training experience evaporated, replaced by the kind of respect that her father's legacy deserved. That evening, as the families departed and the recruits returned to their barracks, Jake Morrison approached Sarah's bunk. His usual swagger was completely gone, replaced by a humility that seemed to age him years in a single day. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice barely audible, "I need to apologize. What I did, what we all did, there's no excuse for it. Your father was a hero. I was soft father, and you deserved better from all of us." Sarah looked up from the letter she was writing, a thank you note to her mother for sending the photograph that had revealed the truth. "Jake, my father taught me that people make mistakes. What matters is what they do after they realize they were wrong." Over the following weeks, the dynamic in the barracks changed completely. The same recruits who had once mocked Sarah's background now competed to learn from her knowledge and experience. They discovered that her exceptional performance wasn't desperation or overcompensation. It was the natural result of being raised by someone who embodied the military values they were all trying to learn. When graduation day arrived, Sarah marched across the stage to receive her insignia, with her worn boots polished to a high shine, and her father's Medal of Honor pinned inside her uniform, close to her heart. In the crowd, she spotted several familiar faces, her fellow recruits' families who had made the trip specifically to honor the daughter of Staff Sergeant Roberto Martinez. The boots that had once been a source of shame and mockery had become a symbol of something far more powerful: the unbreakable connection between a father and daughter, the sacrifice of those who serve, and the truth that real honor cannot be purchased or inherited. It must be earned through courage, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to something greater than oneself.